There are probably hundreds, maybe thousands of reviews of this new Urban Decay Naked Reloaded palette here on YouTube. But today, instead of doing your typical review, I wanted to do something a little bit different, and I'm going to answer these 3 questions. First, if you don't have either palette, which is the right palette for you? Is the Naked Reloaded a dupe for the Anastasia Beverly Hills Sultry palette? And if you already own this, do you need this? Before we get started, I just want to take a moment because I cannot believe that they took this rock star of a palette and turned it into this. Then, I couldn't believe after seeing this that this came out. Like, they look nearly identical. They're not, but they look that way at a first glance. If I were them, I'd be questioning them. But that's just me. Okay, let's get into the first question. Which palette is right for you? If you prefer neutral to cool tone palettes, this is probably the better choice for you. If you prefer neutral to warmer tone palettes, this one's probably right for you. This one is definitely a little bit more warm tone than this palette. So if you have a strict preference, you want to pay attention to that. If you can wear warms and cools, it probably doesn't matter so much. It's going to come down to color preferences within the palette. So if you like a bolder look in your eyeshadow, I would definitely say the Sultry palette is for you. The colors here are a little bit more intense, have a little bit more saturation, and there's a little bit more variety. So you get more looks with this palette. If brown is your go-to eyeshadow look, then this is the palette for you because it is just all shades of brown. Let's take this out. It's just all shades of brown. There's nothing wrong with that, but this is going to give you a little bit more of a basic look than, say, this palette. And that's not to say you can't get basic looks out of this palette, because you can. It's just, this is such a complicated issue. It's just that with the Sultry palette, you're going to be able to get basic looks plus, plus, plus. With the Naked Reloaded palette, you're going to get basic looks. So let's get down to question number 2. Is the Naked Reloaded palette a dupe for the ABH Sultry palette? They certainly look that way on the surface, but when you compare them side by side, there are some real strong differences. So to answer this question, I first went to Tim Talia's page and looked at the dupe situation that she created for the Naked Reloaded, and she actually did her standard like dupe list, but then she also did a comparison like duping between the 2 palettes. And when I looked at that, I thought, okay, yeah, they're pretty similar. And I'll include a link to that like duping between the 2 palettes down below in case you want to check it out yourself if you haven't seen it yet. It's very interesting. In order to really look at these side by side, I reordered the colors and swatched them from light to dark, or the best way I could from light to dark. This was inspired by Jen Loves Reviews. She did a brilliant video where she swatched all of the ABH palettes side by side from light to dark so you could really see where the overlap was. I'll definitely include a link to that video because it's awesome. I think it's one of her best. So I took that inspiration and applied it to this video today, and I swatched all of the Naked Reloaded colors from light to dark, and then went in and swatched all of the Sultry palette colors from light to dark so you could see kind of how the gradient worked side by side. And I think it's really pretty clear that the Sultry palette is just a more vibrant palette. The colors are more saturated, the glitters are a little bit more glittery. Is that a word? They have a little more punch, you know, and there's a little bit more variety because you have the addition of like Cyborg, Slate, and Noir. You know, those 3 really change this palette and give you so many more options. Whereas, you know, the deepest color you have with the Reloaded palette is Endgame. So I would say that the Naked Reloaded is like the Sultry palette's paler, less vibrant cousin. They're not twins. So while these were similar in a lot of ways, I really only could find 5 true dupes, and I used them in this eye look today. This side of the face I used the Sultry palette, and this side of my face I used the Reloaded palette. I think the look is passable as a dupe for each other. So let me run down the shades that I used while I'm rolling some footage of me actually applying them to my face. So I started off laying down a transition shade, and I used Bucked and Birch as my 2 transition shades, and I think you'll see that they look very close. There are some subtle differences, but they are very, very close. Then next I went onto the mobile part of my lid and I applied Pearl and Angel Fire, and these are very light, shimmery, almost sheer shades, and I used my finger to apply them. I started off with a brush on one, and then I went, no, I really need to use my finger to get the full impact of these shades. In my crease, I used Burn and Teak. Now these are not what I would really consider dupes, but once you have them on the eye, I feel like they pass. They're passable, and unless you were really studying the look, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference, although I could tell the difference as I was applying them. They are very definitely one's warmer and one's cooler. They're really close, but not the same. Then up under my brow bone, I used the 2 lightest shades in the palette. I used Bribe and Fresh, certainly dupes, and they actually match my skin tone almost exactly, and very hard to swatch to get them to show up. They really hardly show up in my swatching section. And then for a liner shade under my lower lash line and a little bit in the outer corner, I used Endgame and Dystopian. And those are full-on dupes for each other. Absolutely twins. I think it's funny that they named that brown in the Reloaded palette Endgame, because that really is your endgame in every single eye look. There's no other option. It has to end with that dark brown if you want a little punchy liner shade. Whereas in the Sultry palette, you have Dystopian and you also have Noir, the black shade. So that's also something to consider. The other real obvious dupe is between Bloom and Retro. These salmon-y coral shades, they're very similar. I would say they're pretty close to being dupes for each other if you apply Bloom with a lighter hand. It's just a much more intense shade, but the basic undertones and colors are, I would say, they're twins. It's just one has more saturation than the other. So here's the big question. Do you need both? If you have one, do you need the other? And I would say, if you've already purchased the Sultry palette, no, I wouldn't buy the Reloaded palette. If you've already bought the Reloaded palette, you might want the Sultry palette if you want a little bit more depth in your look. It really just comes down to your own personal preference in your eye looks. How intense, how much variety, that's really where the difference lies. And yes, I'm still mourning the loss of this baby. I post videos every Saturday morning, and I will include a link to last week's video right up here. However, during the month of March, it's my YouTube anniversary, and I'm celebrating by posting additional content on my channel. So if you're not subscribed, you might want to go ahead and hit this little bee icon, subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any videos that I'm posting this month. Thank you so much. I'll see you real soon.